Can Telstra 5G deliver on its promises?
And is it really worth jumping up NBN speed tiers? Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.
Hi, welcome back to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the tech podcast where we grab Australia's leading technology journalists, shake them rigidly until the truth falls out, and then let you decide. I'm Alex Kidman, and I'm joined virtually because, once again, I can't legally leave home as much as I might want to argue that Vertical Hold is an essential podcast, by Adam Turner. Adam, this week the Western Australian Health Minister declared publicly that Xboxes weren't actually an essential good. Now, look, I'm inclined to agree with them, but if you had the power to declare something ludicrous as an essential good, what would it be?
Well, I mean, opinions differ here, but I think I'd have to say wild turkey. I'd say that's
I don't
probably
know that too many opinions would differ on that
probably
one.
being covered. I mean, it'd be a pretty brave politician who closed down the bottle shops at this point in a crisis. But yes, wild turkey, then we'll talk about everything else.
We're also joined once again by a man who we might have to declare as the king of 5G. And not just because he's upgraded to Bill Gates' latest microchip, Chris Duckett. Oh, King Chris, what would your first ruling as our new monarch be?
Everyone is getting vaccinated because I love to see through time because I'm fully vaxxed.
I'm jealous of your vaccination status, but I agree. Everyone should be fully vaccinated. Speaking of things which are not entirely up to speed, broadband speeds, and the NBN in general, has long been our soup du jour here at Vertical Hold, and this week the ACCC put out another measuring broadband report. This time looking at things like web page loading speeds and general speed expectations. It's not quite what you might expect either, and we'll be taking a deep dive into the figures shortly. But first, this week, Mobile World Congress is being held in Barcelona. And look, in other years, you might have heard me chatting to a wide range of Australian tech journos covering the latest in mobile innovations. Except, well, pandemic, That didn't stop Telstra from hosting its own virtual 5G party to talk up the latest in its next generation mobile networks. And rival Optus also had some 5G announcement to make. Chris, taking Telstra first, what was the big takeaway that impressed you?
So I don't know if it impressed me, but I think the big takeaway was Telstra's got 75% population coverage, which means basically if you're in a capital city, you're probably got a very good chance of getting 5G coverage. Telstra had a bunch of other stuff. I mean, they've announced a 5G bike helmet recently. Okay.
Which
I was
we all
going to get
need.
onto the 5G bike helmet in a
Yeah,
bit.
I mean, that
actually.
should be essential. Forget wild turkey. Put that at the top of the list.
Yeah, and I want that bike helmet to vaccinate me as I'm riding, right? But so 75% is kind of, you could be a real grump about it and say, well, that just means they've got basically the capital cities covered and most of the eastern seaboard, because that's how you get to 75% in this country.
Hmm.
The real work kind of starts here. There was something buried in the middle of what Telstra was saying, which was, I should have pulled these figures up. Apologies, but basically that they were pointing out the population coverage between their 3G network and their 4G network, and basically the difference is 0.1%. But it covered something like, it was in the order of like
Chris.
2 million. Wait, was it 2
I'm your
million?
saviour here. I've got the percentage figures. I don't have the numbers of people, but I do have the percentage figures. I was surprised by this as well because while bits of the 3G network have been wound down and they're winding down more, 3G is still the biggest network they've got. It's 99.5% population coverage for 3G, 99.4% for 4G.
Yeah. And I mean, that makes sense in the sense that, 3G the waves do travel further. 5G's got that, it's going to get that. But yeah, you're talking, the reason why the telcos use population coverage is that it's very quick to get to a big number, right? You cover the major centers, you've pretty much you can get to sort of 80% quite easily for a rollout. But yeah, the getting up into the high 90s and stuff, that you're talking millions of square kilometers, and Australia is not dense in any sense. So
Have
that's
you seen our politicians?
yeah. Well, I was talking about population. Well, okay, I can kind of see how that works out. Yeah, but I mean, that's the real difference. That we all know that is the advantage Telstra's had for years, and it still has. Um, Before I jumped on here, I had a look at Optus's 5G coverage map. It is patchy at best, uh, kind of like what Telstra's looked like more or less last year, at the start of last year. Vodafone just has a list of suburbs, and I think that should tell you everything you need to know, right? Because I mean, remember as well that Vodafone's network, when you get to the reaches of it, it piggybacks off Optus, so that should also tell you where they are in the pecking order. So Optus is slowly getting there. Telstra's been able to go out with kind of a bang, and they're probably going to run around and wave this number around and just make sure no one looks at the Australian population, divides it by 75%, and how you can live in some capital cities.
So the coverage maps have always been a work of fiction, perhaps is a generous way of describing it. Um, in your experience, is that getting any better? The
No,
accuracy of what they tell you that you can get.
no. I mean, look, the people listening to this good thing, they don't realize that you can see where I'm speaking from. But behind me is some very thick concrete walls that I've bitched about before. Those things stop Optus signals.
Yes.
They don't stop Telstra signals. So, um, when the ACCC came out the other day and said they were worried about Optus's spectrum holdings, the reason why they're worried about it is because they don't get through that concrete stuff. Um, I was on an Optus reseller in here, and I had to run outside and take calls, and burnt a 12-month special in 6 weeks. Like, don't care. I was willing to lose the money. I'm back on a Telstra reseller, and it's great for my particular bunker.
But pricey.
Well, it's more pricey than the competition.
Yeah.
But now I can get
It's
calls
usable.
and
Yes.
don't have to run out into the rain. So there are certain benefits to paying extra, is what I would say it as. But yeah, if you're looking at a map, yeah, look, the map is going to color you in whether you get 1 bar or 5 bars, and that's the trick. You've got to, unfortunately, you sort of have to get on the horse to work out whether you've got a good coverage or poor coverage, or hopefully you've got a mate that can come round and, well, can't come round to Sydney at the moment, but they could drop by and show you the coverage if
Drive
they've got,
past and wave at
yeah,
you
yeah, yeah.
on
And
their way
that,
to the bottle shop.
knowing 5G coverage probably isn't an essential service, but who knows? The health advice is moving fast at the moment.
Well, speaking of kind of coverage and distance, the other thing Telstra was talking up was having made the longest 5G call. Now, we need to clarify what they mean by longest here.
We really do, yes.
My
This
call's
isn't
longer
someone
than
talking
yours.
to my Aunt Mabel for 15 hours, is it?
No, it's really not. So what it is they got around 113 kilometers on the same site, on the same tower. So the first thing you have to do is take that number and divide it by 2, because that's how far, you know, they were from the tower each. So you're talking in the order of about 60 kilometers away, which is pretty good. But once again, as we say with all these things about 5G propagation, it is on the low band stuff. That's why the low band stuff's there. This isn't your multi-gig speed stuff. But Telstra did say the good thing about this is that they, it'll help when they roll out in regional areas, and that's true. You go down a highway, for instance, and you pick up a few country towns on the way, and it gives you a few, that's how you build up those extra percentage points for your population coverage as well. If it works out, theoretically, it could be cheaper, but I mean, Telstra's probably just going to throw this on every tower it's already got anyway, upgrade all its 3G and 4G to 5G as it goes, and then it might sort of see where it's up to, and it's probably more likely to jackpot into a few areas, and there'll be a few holes somewhere that they might want to patch with microcells or what have you.
Well, the way they were talking about it, they achieved the distance on this call through changes to the Ericsson software that was running on that tower or that cell. So once that goes into production and gets rolled out onto the other towers and the other cells, in theory, you should see that benefit across the entire network.
Yeah, and you've also got to think about the geography. So this was done in Gippsland, which you can correct me on this, Adam, but I'm imagining they weren't doing it in the mountains.
Well, that's what I wondered too. As soon as I heard Gippsland, I thought mountains, and I bet you they found two spots where you had a very nice view of the tower in the distance.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yes.
they've done this stuff before. I know they did one out of round, sort of like Coonabarabran in New South Wales, and
Nicely flat.
it's flat, but
Yeah.
it does have these rocks.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
The
really
odd
high.
Warren Bungle here and there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. If you have a tower on top of the Warren Bungle, just do the trigonometry at home, kids. But you can see how you get these max propagations. There was one I reported on recently in the US, which was US Cellular, did the same sort of thing. They basically got a really big propagation. Now, they did it in Nebraska. And of course, the reason why they did that is flat as a pancake. And if you get the tower high enough, you just drive. And
Yeah.
until the curvature of the Earth comes into play, you're good. So yeah, you're not going to get this stuff in the Great Dividing Range. You're not going to get this in the CBD.
But isn't the trick here as well though? A voice call is impressive in its own way, but it's not a high data use thing. You might get that coverage of people, but it might be, yeah, look, this is voice 5G capable. Oh, you wanted to download something? Sorry.
More than likely, but at the same time, it might be enough to get you that website to get you out of trouble if your car's broken down or something like that. You're probably going to. I wouldn't use it as a home internet service, but it might be better than nothing in an emergency.
So the 3G switch off from the three major networks is contributing to this, isn't it? Because they're taking the often it's the 21 megahertz spectrum that they were using for 3G, and then they're throwing it into 4G and 5G, and they're combining multiple spectrums to sort of extend the reach and get better coverage on the edges. Yes.
Yes, yeah, because 5G kind of has the really good low band propagation, so you need to
Yeah.
refarm that to let 5G do these things that they want to do. Um, and yeah, if you have the right circumstances, it's working. But this stuff is going to get better for as a general user once that 3G spectrum disappears. If you've ever sort of sat there and wondered why is it that my phone, when it gets a bit patchy, drops back to 3G. Well, that's why it's got the better spectrum. 4G spectrum isn't as crash hot for propagation. Hopefully, 5G takes that over.
So, Alex, you keep track of these things. How are we looking in terms of what are the 3G switchover stories from the three major telcos?
So it's a bit of a varied story. Telstra's going to be running a flavor of 3G, 850 megahertz, I think it is, until I think it's mid 2024. Optus is, I think they're slicing theirs down by sort of mid next year, I believe, but not entirely. And Voda, in its kind of classic way, is being a little bit vague about its messaging on all of this. And I think they've already decommissioned, as you said, I think there's the 2100 megahertz, but they've got 900 megahertz still running. The reality there, I mean, Chris, as you say, that drop down to 3G is kind of useful, but it's been a long, long time since anyone's sold a pure 3G device of any stripe. If you're
Yes.
holding on to a much, much older phone, or your mum's got a much, much older phone, then you might need to look at a $20 Coles special just to kind of keep her calling.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And I will say you can do reasonably well if you. I've got a phone here that's like $400. Now that I could hand that to a relative and I wouldn't need to, they'd be fine for another decade sort of thing. So you don't have to spend a king's ransom these days, but
No, not at all.
you will have to get a new handset once that 3G comes off if that's all you're capable of. By the way, I got the numbers. So Telstra's 3G footprint sits at 2.5 million square kilometers and it has 99.5 percent population coverage. The 4G network is at 99.4%, so only zero point 0.1 away, but it's half a million square kilometers smaller.
So that's a lot of very remote people that they're just kind of ducking the network out to grab.
Yeah, yeah, that sort of shows you, like, the old 80-20 rule. You know,
Hmm.
except in Australia, it's probably more like 85-15 sort
Yeah.
of thing in terms of phone coverage.
So you mentioned kind of throwing the tower up as high as possible so you could get that coverage up there. But Telstra's also busy selling off its towers. And in fact, They're sort of selling them to us, aren't they?
Oh
Yes,
God.
thank you, the Future Fund. Hello. Yes, we are buying assets from what we privatized. Is there anything more Australian than this? This is outrageously great in the worst possible ways. So it's Telstra is getting 2.8 billion, and just add that on, by the way, to the NBN
Yeah.
billions they're getting for rent. So 2.8 billion for a 49% stake in the tower business. So they've got around about 8,200 towers around Australia. And you got a consortium here of the Future Fund, the Commonwealth Superannuation Corporation, and Sun Super. And I'm sure there'll be some others, but yeah. But basically, they get almost half, but Telstra remains completely behind the wheel to drive this bad boy where they want. And Telstra said it will be turning to its new shareholders to stump up some cash to, you know, treat towers as a separate business unit now. Like, this really is the first time we're seeing Telstra spin out one of its core arms, I would say, as an operational business.
Because the idea was that the mobile network was always completely separate and what they had complete control over. And that was one of the big things under Sol Trujillo back in the day, is that when everyone spat the dummy and said, no, we're not going to let you build the NBN Sol based on back of the envelope calculations, he went, well, screw you guys. I'm building a 4G network at the time, and we're not going to share it with anybody. And, it's going to be amazingly amazing. And that's what they've kept selling themselves on. So is this one of the first times really since then that we've seen Telstra go, oh, maybe we can be a little bit more open to not having complete control of all of that?
Yeah, I don't think Telstra's giving up too much competitive advantage with this.
Yeah.
By the way, you're also seeing a lot of telcos around the world are doing this as well.
Yeah.
They're spinning out, basically just get some cash to play with.
Mm.
Because the thing is let's treat towers as a separate business. If you're Optus or Voda, you've still got to roll out some sort of connectivity to these bad boys, or you're going to end up having to rent that from Telstra anyway. So Telstra's in the nice situation where they've got a 15-year lease now with these things. They've got, the fiber and microwave connections to them already set up. They don't have to spend the money to put that into place. If Vodafone wants to catch up and share on the towers, they can probably sign a very odious contract and then build out some fiber if they want. But they're probably not going to.
Well, speaking of numbers, Telstra also announced they had something like 1.5 million 5G devices. And I was interested to note, Optus reckons they've got about 1 million, which would seem closer than those coverage maps would suggest if Optus is so
Yeah.
patchy, until you dive into it and realize that they're claiming it's about 830,000 users on Optus Home 5G.
Oh, okay.
It's
So they're
great when
not
they,
actually going
yeah,
on far.
no, it's great when they use devices because
Yeah.
that could be anything, like from a smart lock that happens to have a 5G chip in it. Who knows if they exist, but they will in future. Like all the way up to, as you say, customer premise equipment for a home 5G connection. Yeah, so this is this is a battle of, they're going to shoot these numbers at each other. Look, it really, in the end, it doesn't matter. Like, the next time you get a phone, or maybe even the time after, you'll jump to 5G, right? By that stage, the millimeter wave will be out there. You can burn through your quota in 20 seconds if that's what you wish to do. But until then, okay, cool. Well done, guys. It's a lot of pissing in the wind at the moment.
Well, speaking of burning through your quota, and I remember I once very much annoyed Telstra by writing a story about exactly how fast you could burn through a 5G quota. The Telstra is also talking up, as are Optus, their whole millimeter wave tests and how some of their stuff is now live. Telstra is at least sort of being honest about this and saying, look, unless you've got a 5G hotspot device, because that's millimeter wave, and that was well ahead of its time, then you can't actually access millimeter wave. So basically very, very few people are. That, I think, is one of the more important things for people getting into 5G right now. Pretty much all the phones are only sub-6. They're not going to do the millimeter wave thing. Telstra did say, though, they reckon by the end of the year, they will have some more millimeter wave consumer-facing devices. iPhones.
There'll be an extra galaxy, because there always is.
Yeah, totally. Of course there will be. Of course there will be. I mean, Google did claim the Pixel 5 when they launched it here. They did claim the model they were launching here was millimeter wave compatible. I haven't heard anything from any of the telcos on that, so we might have been sold a pup on that score. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I've got a few of I got one or two of them lurking around. Once I'm allowed back out and I find out where some millimeter wave is, I'll give it a go. And I'm not being very confident that I'll get any either. Because I'm pretty sure I saw in the fine print it was sub 6, depending on which chipset was in it and all that sort of stuff.
It gets messy and really, really hard to tell. I'm very surprised Telstra hasn't gone for some kind of fancy branding because millimeter wave sounds like it's a cooking instruction.
5GX?
Yeah,
5GX,
it's
anybody?
5G plus,
Yeah.
5G next G. I'm throwing these out there for free, Telstra, but the third
Yeah.
one will cost you.
Well, we're in this situation though where first time we've got a technology change, and I think for most people the speed isn't like the reason. Like
Mm.
it's not, it's just doesn't have that jump. And so in decades past, the three of us could be sitting here just going, "Oh my god, this is awful." Everyone's confused. I think everyone's just going, meh. And they just buy there are the early adopters that will go out and buy a 5G phone. But I'm sure there's a bunch of people that have, bought Samsungs and, are going to buy iPhones and they just don't know and they frankly don't care because it does exactly what it did last year.
Well, one of the things with millimeter wave that did excite me because I'm a very, very boring man was Optus announcing that they were hitting 300 meg upload on 5G because it's the other side that so rarely we hear that much about. It's all kind of download, download, download. But as soon as you need to send a file, do a video conference, this kind of stuff, it's all, oh yeah, look, that does maybe a little bit better than the 4G used to if you're lucky. Am I wrong to get excited? Am I wrong or weird or aberrant to get excited about 300 meg uploads?
You sound to me like a person that makes podcasts and has to upload big files to places.
Audio's
I
pretty small. Video
Yeah,
is
true,
where
When
you
we
get
were
true.
doing
killed.
video, it was bad. Yeah,
Yeah,
and that
yeah.
was
No,
pre-NBN days.
That's a very good reason to get excited. I commend you on your excitement, and to stray into other topics that are coming up. It still blows my mind that NBN will sell a plan that can get up to a gigabyte, and the upload is crippled to 50 megabits. That is wow. Is all I could just wow.
Well, we may as well actually jump over to our second topic this week, which is to do with this ACCC measuring broadband report. And Chris, I know you wrote about this and specifically about whether or not consumers should actually jump up to those faster plans because their web pages don't load as fast as they like. What was the finding there?
Okay, so the ACCC loves this one, and in fact, they're right. But if all you care about is web browsing and email, then any plan will suffice. Now, I wouldn't recommend the 12, but you could get by on it. And that was pretty much what the ACCC said. But basically, if you jump from a 50 to 100, you get like milliseconds quicker, but you're not actually going to perceive of it. It's there for when you've got more people in a premise and they're streaming or doing something that requires more data. But if you're just jumping around on the web watching a few video, it's the difference between 50 and 100 is not much at all. It doesn't really matter in the wash. And I
But
say this to you from a 50 megabit connection. I could get 100, but I just don't see the reason why I should upgrade.
is the ACCC trying to paint this as some shortcoming of the NBN that going up to 100 doesn't make your web pages any faster? Are they saying therefore the NBN is not good enough, or are they just saying stating sort of a fact?
Yeah, I think this is them having their actual consumer watchdog status on, not
Yeah,
the NBN regulator hat. They're
yeah,
basically saying to consumers, look, if you got problems with your connection, um, it's probably going to be in-home wiring or some Wi-Fi settings or whatever. It's not likely to be the NBN connection into the side of your wall sort of thing.
yeah.
That's their point, and they're saying look around for plans basically. Um, the, Last week I think it was NBN, the ACCC put out the same sort of thing on mobile where they were like, hey, because the federal court stopped us from stopping Vodafone TPG, well, look at how much mobile phone prices have increased in the past 12 months. And the telcos were kind of miffed by that because they're sort of going, well, we're a business and we've rolled out all this 5G equipment and we've got to make that back. So I just think the ACCC's been on a bit of a tear at the moment, where they're just focused on trying to get the bottom line for consumers as low as possible.
I was kind of struck by some of the caveats that you could apply to this, though, because it's not as though loading a web page is the only thing that people do online. And from what I could see, from what I could see of the report, and I could well be wrong, it would appear to be also single user connections. And where I think those faster connections make more sense. And certainly one of the reasons I'm on a faster connection is because I got a household full of teenagers, basically. And as such, if I was on a 50 connection, I would really feel it because everyone is jamming that connection heavily, especially at the moment with lockdown.
Especially if
That's
they
where you get
use
some of those
Steam.
advantages.
Yeah.
Especially if they use Steam. When I was on 4
Mm.
megabits DSL, it was okay until my son discovered Steam. And then boom, the whole thing would go. And I had to, thankfully, the router I was using at the time let me build in rules to deprioritize his machine. So if no one else was doing anything, he could have the whole 4 megabits. But as soon as I, refreshed a web page, did anything, the network went, "Oi, you, back of the queue." And that was the internet would have been unusable without it.
Look, this time a year ago, this still amuses me. But when NBN was putting on those peak days and they're like, oh, look, our network's so good it can handle the traffic. It was Call of Duty updates.
Yeah.
That's what was doing it. Like, yeah, Alex's situation is exactly the reason the ACCC identified for why you want to go up a plan.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, in the case of yes, it is those data sucking gaming platforms that really make people sort of have we really advanced that far from yelling up the corridor? Who's on the internet? Get off! I
Yeah.
want to make a call. You know.
It's all those Linux distributions everyone's downloading.
Absolutely.
But so look, speaking of speed, one of the other things that came out of the report that I did think was interesting was that they gave an expected speed for gigabit plans. Because to date, I say all, there are very few NBN ISPs that actually do offer gigabit plans. If you're in an area that can get them, if you're in that tiny, tiny fraction of HFC or all of the fiber to the premises footprint, um, have basically said, "Oh, look, we'll do our best effort to get you up towards a gig, but yeah, we're not going to give you a number." And I think the ACCC said it was something like 670 meg on average.
Yep. And the upload was around about 45. Um, the beauty of this ultra fast plan, as NBN calls it, is that this is the only plan that doesn't have over provisioning on it.
Hmm.
So in these reports, you're never going to see this thing get more than 100%,
Yeah.
because you do look at this report and you see certain telcos can provide 101% of a 50 or a 100 megabit plan. But also your over provisioning is only on the download stream. It is not on the upload stream, like for any plan in the NBN, right? So like what you do these speed tests and the ACCC freaks out about the download link, but not the other one, the upload link, which, as we've said, this is getting more and more important, right? As people actually make content rather than just being consumers. And so, yeah, yeah. So it's kind of, if the ACCC sees no reason to go between 50 to 100 as a single user, then there's really, really, what's the difference between half a gig and a gig? If that's making a difference to you, call up your provider, jump on a business plan, because that's
Hmm.
really what you should be doing if you're using up that much data.
Yeah.
And the other thing with these connections is that they become really variable. But we're talking about big numbers here. So they're like, oh well, you know, there's a drop at 6 p.m. which everyone on the network has, and then funnily enough, it spikes at 11 p.m. I don't know how their testing got that. But the
I
difference
know
between
why it used to spike in the old days because some telcos would have peak and off peak times. So you'd
Hmm.
set all your
oh yeah
BitTorrent to come
yeah
on at 11 p.m.
yeah well exactly
and switch off at 6.
there should be another dip here, not the actual spike.
Yeah.
But the difference between it is like 130 megabits, and the ACCC is like, oh, this is highly variable. It's like, well, yeah, if I was on 200, I'd be concerned. But
Mm.
when I'm sitting at about 700, ah, you know, what's that between mates? Like the other interesting thing I saw in the report was that some people were on the gigabit plan, but they still had 100 megabit Ethernet ports in their homes,
Oh,
so they got taken out for good reasons.
Did not
yeah.
think ahead. Did not
No,
Yeah.
plan that one.
no, no. So it's very good. It's very good to say you're paying a very high price for the fastest plan, but please, you do need to get to, one of the newer Ethernet standards.
They
Telstra,
also, sorry, Adam, you go.
I was going to talk about Telstra not shifting customers off who couldn't get the right speeds, but have you got something else you want to talk
I
about
was going to
first,
go to the
Neil?
point I had before that, which was
Okay.
about underperforming
Yeah.
services. They also identified kind of where the underperforming services on the NBN were, and it felt to me like a statement of the bleeding obvious because they said none, 0% of underperforming NBN services were fiber to the node connections. Oh wait,
That can't be right. I was looking
no
at
wait,
that thinking that had to be wrong.
that must be wrong.
Fiber to the node is perfect,
There's
everyone.
there's a number dropping off that. Yeah, there's a number on the front.
I think it should be 100%
Kill
Yeah.
that.
of 100% of underperforming NBN
Kill that
services are
discussion.
fiber
Let's
to
go
the
on to
node.
Adam's bit.
Oh, I
can't
mean, there's
remember what
still
it is.
there's still something
Yeah.
to be said there. That look, the underperforming services are still fiber to the node. They've always been fiber to the node in this report. They are trending down, thankfully, and maybe in a couple of years when NBN does do these upgrades, we can stop talking about it.
So Telstra, speaking of not getting what you paid for, Telstra also fessed up that it hadn't been doing the right thing by people who found out that they couldn't get what they paid for.
Yeah, they should
As
have
a
been.
surprise to no one.
Yeah, and look, they should get a big slap about this sort of stuff. But it is pretty magical how companies in Australia, as long as they confess it to the regulator seems to go, "Oh, you told us. Okay, cool." I wish, it'd be nice to
The
walk up to.
Catholic way of doing business, basically.
Look, it would be nice to walk up to the cops and say, "Oh, yeah, I just murdered a couple of people," and they'd be like, "Oh, you told us. Oh, that's fine.
Oh,
Off you go.
thanks for
Yeah.
the heads up.
Here, pay a small fine. It's fine. Here, sign this enforceable undertaking, and we'll be done here." Yeah, that would be nice. But yeah,
Are you saying you want to murder people, Chris? Has this podcast changed?
quick segment cut. This is my list. Right, off we go. But yeah, so basically, this is something that Telstra should have been doing, which is you get on the NBN, and we're talking here about fiber to the basement, fiber to the node, and maybe a little bit HFC. But you get somewhere, you get a connection, you pay for 100 megabits, you can only get 80. Telstra's then meant to turn around to you and say, well, what do you want to do? You want to drop back to 50, or do you want to realize you'll not get 100%, but you can get whatever it is you're getting? They weren't. They just kept people there, and they kept the extra coin. So now they have to make up for it in the way of, giving people their money back. But, they really, really should have had to pay something decent here. But Australian regulators, what can you do?
Because I guess there is extra coin involved there. If a telco knows, right, this can only hit 80% of capacity, you don't have to do the provisioning there. You can save that valuable CVC for other customers without having to spend it, right?
Exactly. You take the CVC, the extra CVC you get on the bigger plan, and you basically treat it as a gift because it's never going to be used. And then that's how you get 100%, over 100% on the ACCC's report. That's also how, look, Telstra just does a series of, it still annoys me that when they put in the over provisioning, they were trying to sell it to customers as a free speed upgrade. It's like, you're being forced to do this. Like, it is not a gift. Turns out the gifts were going to Telstra. Who knew?
But it's very, very similar to what we see, and I think it's still running now. The whole 6 months promotional pricing that pretty much every NBN ISP has to try and get people to jump up to 100 or to 250 or whatever plans that you only get if you are speed increasing. They're all selling them as their own invention, but it's an NBN
Yeah.
gift, isn't it?
Yeah. It's NBN's promotions that they're reselling. I mean, that's how the system's meant to work. And you have seen, in various reports and stuff, the telcos have sort of said, well, this is the product we're given, so this is how we're going to sell it. Like, the fact of the matter is, if we get new customers, we get, these discounts from NBN, and does it take half the network to jump between providers every 6 months? Maybe. Like, it's only with more churn, I think someone might actually wake up to themselves and realize the pricing structure is moving people in the direction of jumping between providers. Like, it does seem ridiculous whenever you're on whatever provider it is, have a look at the ridiculous deal if you're a new customer, and just, you sit there and ask yourself, well, why can't I have it? I've been with you for X many years or whatever. But it's like, no. You're where our profits come from. We won't give you that.
But that's always been the way. If you want to upset a Foxtel customer, ask them about that. They will lose it because Foxtel always has treated their existing customers like dirt and offered amazing deals to new customers. And this is paid TV, so it's just the way of doing things, at least
Yeah,
in Australia.
yeah. Look, thought without notice, but
Hey, that's what
geez,
we do best.
yeah, exactly, yeah. No thought, just putting it out there. But geez, I'm looking at the KO subscription at the moment and thinking, what's left to watch? In the next 12 months, a whole bunch of sports are shooting off to Stan and other places. So those Foxtel customers are going to get pretty annoyed, or even more so, actually.
Yeah. I think we're about due to get Steve Malk back to talk about all the streaming stuff. With the Olympics is not far away, yeah?
Yeah, and like you've got Channel 10 picked up A-League and stuff like that. Like
Yeah.
Fox has had that since the inception. Like, holy moly, that's a pretty big thing. But yeah, we'll leave that to Steve to dissect.
Alex,
sports.
wake up. We're going to
Sports.
talk about broadband again. It's okay. It's okay. So
Sports is funding broadband, Alex. It's okay.
we talked about the big CVC speed boost, the 40% speed boost that they gave everybody during the pandemic to help the network cope. And then they were going to get rid of it, and then they weren't. Then they were going to get rid of it, and then they weren't. I've lost track. Do we still have it or not?
No, we don't.
No, we don't.
We don't. But NBN is redoing its pricing structure as we speak. So it's talking to the telcos about this. A couple of weeks ago, NBN finally unveiled the no CVC options that senators have been trying to get it out of them for about 6 months. And they're like, no, it's all commercial in confidence. But basically, they've gone to the operators and said, okay, you can have the current structure with more inclusions, or we can just go the whole flat fee like you all want, but we're going to jack the rates up. And this kind of halfway house where anything over 100 doesn't have any CVC, but then you do CVC for the smaller plans. And NBN says that that's kind of, they want that because some operators will target the lower end of the market and they can play CVC games. And then you've got operators at the top end of the market who just want to pay the access fee and go for broke. Pretty much, I think you could take out of this that the options on either side, NBN really doesn't want to see. They kind of want this one. They're presenting the one in the middle as the reasonable middle ground. So I think that's where they're trying to get to. But there's a few telcos that are just want the whole thing gone anyway because it's frankly easier on their end.
So it's the regular value meal of NBN services.
it's something like that. It's what's between a cheeseburger and a quarter pounder? Somewhere in there. Oh, maybe. Oh, there we go. It's the fillet of fish option. That's what it is.
Well, that static sound can only mean that it's time to wrap up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks once again to Chris for joining us for the show.
Pleasure to be back because I've got nowhere else to be.
Well, while we have you trapped there, we have to ask you the classic 3 Vertical Hold questions. Where can people find your work online? Where can they find your social media online? And the big contentious question, which sitcom is the all-time greatest?
Okay. So you just type my name, Chris Duckett, into Google. You will find me, or go to zdnet.com. You'll find me there. Look, hunt me down on social on your own. Just a general warning. As for greatest sitcom, it is definitely Curb by a mile.
You have plenty of enthusiasm, I see.
Oh, look, Larry David. Look, I've been accused of using it as a textbook for life by my wife. She's not entirely wrong.
Not going there. As always, you can catch us online at Vertical Hold AU on Twitter, at the Vertical Hold Facebook page, or on the web at verticalhold.com.au.
And speaking of broadband, just a reminder for regular listeners, we're thrilled to have Aussie Broadband as our sponsor this year, and they've given us a special promo code which gives new customers a $10 per month discount for 6 months when signing up online for an unlimited plan between NBN 50 and NBN 100. The promo code is vertical, so hopefully that'll come in handy for Australian listeners shopping around for a great broadband service. And as always, thanks everyone for listening. No matter where you are, no matter where you're stuck, hang in there and we'll talk to you again next week. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support. We'd have to come up with the new soup of the day, though. The
Yeah,
chef
well,
only knows one dish.